Let's finish up this chapter with a quick talk about the different endocrine glands and what they do. We're going to start with the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys. They're made of an outer cortex and an inner medulla. And for the endocrine system, the cortex is the most important part. That's going to release adrenal glucocorticoids. I can say it, glucocorticoids. Three types of steroid hormones. Remember, a lot of hormones are proteins. These are steroids, which are lipids. The most important of these is cortisol, which is a stress hormone that increases the amount of glucose in the blood. And that's important because when there's more glucose in the blood, then tissues such as your skeletal muscle tissues can take in more glucose to power themselves, to give you that energy to, say, run away from danger. That's a problem if the stress that you're encountering is chronic, and if it's not a short-term danger, then you end up with elevated glucose levels that can cause a bunch of other hormone problems, including it can be an exacerbating condition in diabetes. Your adrenal glands also secrete sex hormones. Now, most of the sex hormones are going to be made by the gonads, the ovaries or the testes. But the sex hormones both make estrogens and androgens, including testosterone. Next up is our thyroid gland, which sits on the front of the larynx, just under the thyroid cartilage, excuse me. It's kind of wraps around the front of the trachea, right there at the bottom of your neck. And the thyroid is responsible for modulating your metabolism. It tells all the cells how much proteins and carbohydrates and fat to break down, how much to store in tissues. In children, it has to be combined with growth hormone in order for a child to grow normally. So sometimes the problem with a child not growing enough isn't the level of growth hormone, it's actually the level of thyroid hormone. That's also very easily corrected. So here's the mechanism for the thyroid, and I do want you to understand this part. So this mechanism starts in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus secretes a hormone to the anterior pituitary, which is called thyrotropin-releasing hormone. The anterior pituitary then releases a hormone called thyroid-stimulating hormone, which cleverly stimulates the thyroid. I know, who would have thunk it? The thyroid then produces thyroid hormone. There are actually a couple different thyroid hormones. We're just going to talk about them all as one today. And the thyroid hormones then go out into the bloodstream to different tissues of the body. And the more thyroid hormone you make, the more metabolic activity you will have in tissues. The levels of both thyroid stimulating hormone and thyroid hormone are monitored by the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. And when those are high, then the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary shut down or inhibit the amount of hormones that they're secreting. So when somebody goes to their doctor and gets a thyroid test, the doctor actually does a test for thyroid stimulating hormone, which is the easiest thing to test for. So by testing for thyroid stimulating hormone, you're testing whether this whole feedback loop is working properly. If thyroid stimulating hormone is too high and a person looks like their thyroid is too high, their thyroid hormone levels are too high because they have say an overactive metabolism, then they need something to inhibit the production of thyroid stimulating hormone. If the levels of thyroid stimulating hormone are high, but they have a slow metabolism, then we know that the thyroid itself is not working properly, and doctors can prescribe thyroid hormone, which is also a very inexpensive, really easy fix. The symptoms of hypothyroidism, or having too little thyroid hormone, all go back to the fact that the thyroid stimulates the metabolism. So people with hypothyroidism tend to look really tired. They, because there's less oxygen consumption, they tend to be very cold. They get puffy eyes and droopy cheeks, partly because of fluid gain in the face. They tend to gain weight very easily. They have a very slow metabolism. Often they have very, very dry hair and skin. These symptoms with the addition of thyroid hormone can be decreased significantly. And so you see someone with narrow, thinner cheeks, less droopiness under the eyelids, and healthier looking hair. And all of that is as a result of treating the hypothyroidism. So here's an awkward Yeti cartoon with the red blood cell saying to King Thyroid, who is just like, crapping out on the couch watching Netflix. Thyroid, my liege, the organs grow weary. They require more hormone. Thyroid says, silence. Sir, silence. And this is just the thyroid saying, I'm not going to do my job. I don't want to make thyroid hormone. Hyperthyroidism is the opposite problem, where the thyroid produces too much hormone, and it can lead to something called a goiter, which is a overgrowth of the thyroid gland itself. And you can usually see this on the neck. This is a very large goiter. And the reason we had to go to the non-industrialized world to get a picture of someone with a big goiter is because in the industrialized world, we don't have goiters anymore. For one thing, it's very easy to detect thyroid problems before someone develops a goiter. And secondly, the main element that you need in your body for your thyroid to work properly is iodine. And so once in the industrialized world we started adding iodine to salt, goiters went away and thyroid problems became much less common. So the iodine in salt is enough to provide sufficient iodine for most people's thyroids to work normally. People with hyperthyroidism have increased oxygen consumption, increased metabolism. They tend to get warm or hot very easily. They're often excessively sweaty. They get overheated very easily. And oddly enough, they get weak muscles, and it's because the increased metabolism actually causes catabolism, which is a breakdown of large molecules. It can actually break down the muscles, and they can have weight loss. Their reflexes can become hyperexcitable. It can also lead to insomnia and irritability, and untreated, it can lead to psychosis. So with hypo or hyperthyroidism, both of those can cause some very significant symptoms. Graves' disease is a condition in which the body produces antibodies that mimic thyroid stimulating hormone, and so the thyroid stays overstimulated. One of the other symptoms of hyperthyroidism is bulging eyes, which happens because the tissues behind the eyes overdevelop. Marty Feldman was an actor who was very famous for his bulging eyes, and he was a brilliant comedic actor who starred in the movie Young Frankenstein. So this here is a scene from Young Frankenstein. You can watch that on your own. The parathyroid glands are these little tiny things that sit on the back of the thyroid gland. So here's the pharynx muscles that go around the esophagus. Remember, the thyroid wraps around the trachea, which is your windpipe, around to the back of the pharynx, and the parathyroid glands are these little tiny things on the back of the thyroid. Parathyroid hormone regulates the level of calcium in the blood, which is incredibly important because your nervous system and your muscular system don't work correctly without proper levels of calcium in the blood. If your parathyroid gland doesn't work correctly, you could either have muscle twitches as a result of overexcited neurons or muscles, or muscle cramping and muscle paralysis, as depending on whether your body is making too much parathyroid or too little parathyroid hormone. Finally, the pancreas is a really important endocrine gland. We're also going to talk about the pancreas's exocrine function because it has a very important function in the digestive system, which is what these pancreatic ducts are for. The endocrine function of the pancreas is production of insulin, which we already talked about. That's the one that tells the liver and skeletal muscle cells that glucose levels in the blood are high and they need to take in more glucose. And the pancreas also produces glucagon, which is a signal that glucose levels in the blood are low, and that's a signal for the liver to release the glycogen that it has been storing. So insulin and glucagon are responsible for regulating blood sugar levels within homeostasis, keeping blood sugar levels in homeostasis, and those are both produced by the pancreas. So that's the end of all you need to know of the endocrine system. Stay tuned for the next chapter.